Sometimes the biggest love story begins with the one question you never wanted to hear. I never meant to stare. That was the excuse I repeated in my head as I stood frozen just inside the locker room, clutching my backpack so tightly my fingers ached. Steam drifted lazily through the air after swim practice, carrying the familiar scent of chlorine and fresh laundry. Metal lockers slammed shut one after another while teammates laughed about tomorrow's meet, completely unaware that my world was about to change forever. Liam Brooks had always been impossible not to notice. At 6'2", with messy dark hair that never stayed in place and an effortless confidence that made everyone gravitate toward him, he wasn't just captain of the university swim team. He was my best friend. We'd shared birthdays, road trips, family dinners, and enough inside jokes to fill an entire notebook. We'd known each other since we were 8 years old, when he had offered half of his peanut butter sandwich to the skinny kid eating lunch alone on the playground. That skinny kid had been me. Somewhere between elementary school and college, friendship had quietly become something I could never admit aloud. I had convinced myself I was good at hiding it. I laughed when he laughed. I celebrated every victory. I listened whenever he needed someone. I became the kind of friend who always stayed exactly one step behind his own feelings. Until that afternoon. I wasn't looking because of anything inappropriate. At least that's what I desperately wanted to believe. Liam had just pulled a clean t-shirt over his shoulders while shaking water from his damp hair, sunlight slipping through the high windows and catching tiny droplets that sparkled for a split second. It wasn't his appearance that stole my attention. It was the peaceful smile on his face. For the first time all week, he actually looked relaxed. After endless practices, midterms, and pressure from everyone expecting him to lead the team, he finally looked like the boy I had grown up with instead of the athlete everyone admired. I smiled without realizing it. Then he turned. Our eyes locked. Time stopped. My heartbeat crashed against my ribs so loudly I couldn't hear anything else. Liam tilted his head slightly, studying me with the same curious expression he'd worn whenever he tried solving impossible math problems back in high school. One corner of his mouth lifted into a teasing grin. He walked the few steps between us, close enough that I could see the tiny freckle beneath his left eye I'd memorized years ago. Then, with a voice calm enough to silence every thought inside my head, he asked, "Do you like me?" The words weren't loud. Nobody else seemed to notice. But to me, they echoed through the entire room. My mouth opened, yet nothing came out. Every excuse disappeared. Every carefully built wall collapsed at once. My face burned. My hands trembled. I wanted to laugh it off, make some stupid joke, pretend I'd misunderstood him. Instead, I did the only thing my terrified heart knew how to do. I turned around and ran. Ethan did not stop running until he reached the empty parking lot behind the student arts building. His lungs burned, not because of the short distance, but because his heart refused to slow down. He leaned against a brick wall, closed his eyes, and replayed those 4 simple words again and again until they no longer sounded real. Maybe Liam had been joking. Maybe he had noticed Ethan staring and decided to tease him the way best friends often did. That had to be it. Liam was outgoing, confident, comfortable with everyone. Ethan was the complete opposite. He had spent years perfecting the art of hiding emotions behind quiet smiles and careful conversations. There was no reason to believe that one question meant anything more. Even so, he could not bring himself to return Liam's messages that afternoon. His phone buzzed 3 times while he sat alone in the campus library pretending to read a sketchbook filled with unfinished drawings. The first message read, "Where did you disappear to?" The second simply asked, "Are you okay?" The third arrived an hour later. "You left your water bottle in the locker room." Ethan stared at the screen until it went dark again. He typed half a dozen replies before deleting every single one. I was embarrassed. I felt sick. I had somewhere to be. None of them sounded believable because none of them explained the truth. The truth was that he had spent 10 years protecting a friendship that suddenly felt frighteningly fragile. The next morning became the first morning in years that they did not walk to class together. Ethan left his apartment 20 minutes earlier than usual, taking the longer route across campus just to avoid passing the athletic center. The crisp autumn air carried the smell of fresh coffee from the student cafe, and groups of freshmen hurried toward early lectures with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. Everything looked exactly the same, yet Ethan felt as though he had somehow stepped into a different version of his life. During art history, He caught himself glancing toward the classroom door every few minutes, half expecting Liam to appear even though they did not share that class. When lunchtime arrived, Ethan skipped their usual table outside the student union and carried his sandwich to a quiet bench near the sculpture garden instead. He watched leaves drift across the sidewalk while convincing himself that distance was the safest choice. If he acted normal again, eventually that awkward moment would disappear. At least that was the plan. Unfortunately, Liam Brooks had never accepted being ignored. Late that afternoon, as Ethan packed away charcoal pencils after studio class, someone knocked gently against the open classroom door. Ethan looked up before he could stop himself. Liam stood there wearing a gray hoodie over his practice clothes, one hand tucked into his pocket while the other held a familiar blue water bottle. His expression was softer than usual, missing the playful confidence everyone expected from the swim captain. He walked inside without waiting for permission, placed the bottle carefully on Ethan's desk, and smiled in that quiet way only Ethan had ever seen. "You have been avoiding me all day," Liam said. "Did I do something wrong?" Ethan searched desperately for an answer, but every word became trapped behind the secret he had carried for far too long. The silence stretched so long that Ethan almost convinced himself Liam would eventually give up and leave. Instead, Liam pulled out the chair across from him and sat down as naturally as he had 1,000 times before. The afternoon sun poured through the tall studio windows, painting warm streaks of gold across unfinished canvases and jars filled with paintbrushes. Around them, a few students quietly packed their supplies, paying little attention to the two friends whose conversation had suddenly become the most important moment of Ethan's life. Ethan forced himself to look down at the sketch lying on his desk, pretending to adjust the shading with a charcoal pencil that had long stopped moving. "You did not do anything wrong," he finally whispered. Liam folded his arms on the edge of the table, studying Ethan with the same patient expression he had worn ever since they were children. He had always been like that. When Ethan had struggled to ride a bicycle, Liam had spent 3 afternoons jogging beside him until he finally balanced on his own. When Ethan failed his first chemistry exam, Liam had stayed awake helping him study until nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. He never pushed. He simply stayed. "Then why does it feel like I lost my best friend overnight?" Liam asked quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. That question hurt far more than the one in the locker room. Because Liam was right. In less than 24 hours, Ethan had changed everything. He stopped replying to messages. He avoided familiar hallways. He skipped lunch. He even left the campus coffee shop the moment he spotted Liam standing in line. None of it felt fair, especially to someone who had done nothing except care about him for more than a decade. Ethan wanted to explain everything. He wanted to confess that every birthday photo hidden in his apartment felt precious, that every late-night conversation meant more than friendship, and that every smile Liam gave someone else somehow made his own heart jealous before he could stop it. Instead, he smiled weakly and said the safest lie he could find. "I have just been stressed." Liam raised one eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "You have never hidden from me because of stress." Ethan could not argue with that. Their friendship had survived broken bones, family problems, failed classes, and heartbreaks that belonged to other people. They had always told each other everything. Until now. Liam glanced toward the sketchbook still lying open on the desk. Ethan instinctively reached to close it, but he was a second too late. Liam had already noticed the pencil drawing covering the page. It was not finished, but the face was unmistakable. Dark hair, familiar smile, the tiny freckle beneath the left eye. It was Liam. Ethan felt every drop of color disappear from his face. Months earlier, he had drawn it from memory after returning home from one of Liam's swim meets, never expecting anyone else to see it. The room suddenly felt too quiet. Liam stared at the drawing for several long seconds before slowly lifting his eyes back toward Ethan. There was no laughter, no teasing grin, only genuine surprise mixed with something Ethan could not quite understand. Before Ethan could reach for an explanation, voices echoed from the hallway outside the studio. 2 students walked past the open door, chatting excitedly about campus gossip. One sentence drifted clearly into the room. "Did you hear? I think Liam Brooks is finally asking someone out this weekend." Ethan's heart sank before Liam even had the chance to react. The words drifting through the hallway landed like a stone in Ethan's chest. He lowered his eyes before Liam could notice the disappointment spreading across his face. Of course, someone like Liam would be asking somebody out. It was only a matter of time. People admired him everywhere they went. Professors remembered his name. Freshmen whispered when he walked across campus. Even the barista at the student cafe somehow knew his usual order before he reached the counter. Ethan had always known that eventually someone would become more than just another face in Liam's life. He had simply never prepared himself for the day it actually happened. Liam glanced toward the hallway for only a moment before looking back at Ethan. "Do not listen to random gossip," he said calmly. "People on this campus invent stories every week." Ethan forced a small smile, hoping it looked convincing. Maybe this one is true. Liam opened his mouth as if he wanted to explain something, but a group of swim teammates suddenly appeared outside the studio door. "Captain, coach is looking for you," one of them called. "The meeting starts in 5 minutes." Liam let out a quiet sigh, clearly frustrated by the interruption. He stood slowly but did not immediately leave. Instead, he rested one hand on the edge of Ethan's desk. "We are not finished talking," he said. "You have been my best friend for 11 years. I am not letting one strange afternoon erase all of that." Ethan nodded without trusting himself to speak. Liam held his gaze another second before finally walking away with his teammates. The room felt strangely empty the moment he disappeared around the corner. Ethan remained motionless until the last student left the studio. Only then did he carefully close the sketchbook and slide it into his backpack as though hiding evidence no one else could ever see. Outside, the late afternoon sky glowed with shades of orange and pale blue. Students crossed the quad carrying sports equipment, textbooks, and paper cups filled with hot coffee. Campus life continued exactly as it always had, yet Ethan felt disconnected from every familiar sound around him. Instead of heading home, he wandered aimlessly through the tree-lined paths until he reached the old baseball field where he and Liam had spent countless summer evenings as children. The chain-link fence was still there. The faded wooden bleachers still creaked whenever someone climbed them. Ethan sat in the highest row and watched Little League players practice with their families cheering from the sidelines. Memories arrived one after another without permission. Liam teaching him how to throw a baseball. Liam laughing after both of them missed an easy catch. Liam promising that no matter where life took them, they would always stay friends. Back then, everything had seemed so simple. His phone vibrated softly in his pocket. He already knew who it was before checking the screen. Liam had sent only one sentence. "I miss talking to you." Ethan stared at the message for a long time. His thumb hovered above the keyboard while dozens of replies formed and disappeared inside his mind. "I miss you too. I never wanted this. I wish I could tell you everything." In the end, he locked the screen without typing a single word. Across the field, a young couple laughed together as they shared a carton of fries from the concession stand. Ethan looked away almost immediately. He had spent years convincing himself that loving someone quietly was enough. Now he was beginning to realize that silence had a way of creating its own kind of loneliness. As the evening sun slipped below the horizon, another notification lit up his phone. This time it was not from Liam. It was from their mutual friend Noah, and the message contained only one line that made Ethan's heartbeat stop once again. "Meet me tomorrow morning. There is something about Liam that you deserve to know." The next morning arrived with a gray sky and the kind of cool breeze that made students pull their jackets a little tighter as they crossed campus. Ethan barely remembered the walk to the student cafe where Noah had asked him to meet. His mind had spent the entire night replaying every conversation with Liam, searching for clues he had somehow missed. Noah was already waiting at a corner table, slowly stirring a cup of black coffee while glancing toward the window. The moment Ethan sat down, Noah offered a sympathetic smile that only made Ethan more anxious. "You look like you have not slept," Noah said gently. Ethan managed a tired laugh. "I have not." Noah nodded as though he had expected that answer. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. The soft hum of espresso machines and quiet conversations filled the silence between them. Finally, Noah leaned forward. "I have been debating whether I should tell you this because it is not exactly my place. But after everything I have seen this week, I think you deserve to know." Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. "Know what?" Noah glanced around to make sure nobody was listening before lowering his voice. "People keep saying Liam is about to ask someone out. That part is true." Ethan looked down at the untouched cup of hot chocolate in front of him. Somehow hearing the rumor confirmed out loud hurt even more than hearing. Strangers whisper about it. Noah quickly continued before Ethan could respond. What everyone gets wrong is who they think that person is. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes. Noah smiled faintly. Half the campus assumes it is some girl because that makes an easy story. The truth is that Liam has never told anyone a name. Ethan frowned. How do you know that? Noah chuckled quietly. Because I am his roommate. Ethan blinked in surprise. Noah had lived with Liam for almost 2 years, yet he had never mentioned anything remotely personal about him before. A few nights ago, Noah continued, Liam asked me something strange. He wanted to know whether a friendship that had lasted more than 10 years could survive if one person admitted they had feelings for the other. Ethan forgot to breathe. Every sound inside the cafe seemed to disappear. Noah watched his expression carefully before speaking again. I asked him whether the other person had given any sign. He smiled and said, I think he is scared. Ethan lowered his head, suddenly unable to meet Noah's eyes. His fingers tightened around the warm paper cup. Could Liam really have been talking about him? It sounded impossible. Too hopeful. Too dangerous. Noah reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. This accidentally fell out of Liam's notebook yesterday when we were studying. I was going to hand it back, but then I saw your name. Ethan hesitated before accepting the page. It was covered with rough pencil sketches instead of words. Most were unfinished drawings of campus buildings, a basketball court, the old baseball field, and a quiet bench near the sculpture garden. In every single sketch, there was one familiar figure standing somewhere in the background with a backpack slung over one shoulder. Ethan recognized himself immediately. His throat tightened as he realized that while he had secretly filled an entire sketchbook with drawings of Liam, Liam had apparently been quietly drawing him too. Before Ethan could fully process the discovery, his phone suddenly lit up with an incoming message from Liam. It contained only one sentence. Can we meet tonight? I have something I should have. Told you a long time ago. That evening arrived far more quickly than Ethan wanted. The message from Liam stayed open on his phone throughout the afternoon, read so many times that every word had become permanently etched into his thoughts. Can we meet tonight? I have something I should have told you a long time ago. It sounded simple, yet it carried the weight of every unanswered question from the past 11 years. As sunset painted the campus in soft shades of orange and gold, Ethan found himself walking toward the old botanical garden behind the university library, the place where they always went whenever life became too loud. The winding brick paths, quiet fountain, and rows of maple trees had witnessed countless conversations between them, from childhood dreams to college decisions. Tonight, however, the familiar place felt strangely unfamiliar. Liam was already there, standing beside the fountain with both hands tucked into the pockets of his navy jacket. He looked up the moment Ethan approached, and for a second neither of them spoke. The only sound came from water spilling gently over smooth stone and leaves rustling in the cool autumn breeze. Liam smiled first, but it was smaller than usual, uncertain in a way Ethan had never seen before. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. Ethan nodded. I almost did not. Liam let out a slow breath. I figured. They began walking together along the garden path, without deciding who should lead. The silence between them no longer felt angry. It felt careful, as though both of them understood that one wrong sentence could change everything forever. After several minutes, Liam stopped beside a wooden bench overlooking the pond. Do you remember this place? He asked. Ethan laughed softly despite himself. You pushed me into that pond when we were 13. Liam covered his face with one hand, embarrassed. I apologized at least 100 times. You also bought me the biggest hot chocolate they sold afterward. Liam smiled more genuinely. You forgave me before we even left the cafe. Ethan looked toward the still water, reflecting the fading sky. I always forgave you. Those words lingered between them longer than either expected. Liam's expression softened, and for a brief moment Ethan noticed the same nervousness that had been haunting his own heart. It was comforting in an unexpected way. The confident swim captain who always knew exactly what to say was searching just as desperately for the right words. Noah probably should not have told you anything, Liam admitted, looking down at the stone path beneath his feet. Ethan hesitated before answering honestly. He showed me the sketches. Liam closed his eyes for a second and laughed quietly at himself. I was wondering where that page disappeared. Why did you draw me? Ethan asked before fear could stop him. Liam did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and carefully unfolded another worn piece of paper. It was older, the edges softened by time. He handed it to Ethan without saying a word. Ethan unfolded it carefully. Inside was a faded ticket stub from the county fair they had visited together during high school. Across the back, written in neat blue ink, were only a few simple words. Tell him before graduation. I cannot keep pretending forever. Ethan looked up in disbelief. You wrote this? Liam nodded slowly. 3 years ago. Ethan felt his heart race as every memory suddenly shifted into a completely different shape. All this time he had believed he was the only one carrying a secret. Before he could speak, Liam took one careful step closer, his voice barely louder than the breeze moving through the trees. There is something I have been trying to tell you since long before that day in the locker room, and if I lose my courage again tonight, I do not think I will ever forgive myself. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat louder than the fountain behind them. The folded ticket stub trembled slightly between his fingers as he stared at Liam, searching his face for any sign that this was another misunderstanding. There was none. For the first time since they had met as children, Liam looked completely vulnerable. The confident smile that usually carried him through swim meets, group projects, and crowded parties had disappeared. All that remained was the quiet honesty of someone who had finally grown tired of hiding. Ethan carefully folded the ticket stub again and handed it back. You have been carrying that for 3 years? He asked softly. Liam accepted it with a small nod. Longer than I should have. He slipped it into his jacket pocket before continuing. I kept waiting for the perfect moment. Then I realized there probably was not going to be one. Ethan looked toward the pond where the last rays of sunlight shimmered across the water. He wanted to believe every word, yet years of protecting his own secret made hope feel almost dangerous. Then why did you ask me that day? He finally whispered. Liam smiled faintly, remembering the locker room. Because I caught you looking at me the same way I have been looking at you for years. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. Every awkward silence, every lingering glance, every unexplained smile suddenly fit together like pieces of a puzzle he had been holding upside down. I thought you were making fun of me, he admitted. Liam immediately shook his head. Never. I was nervous. I asked the question before I could talk myself out of it. Then you ran away, and I spent the rest of the day wondering if I had just ruined the most important friendship in my life. Ethan let out a quiet laugh, mixed with relief. I was convinced I had ruined it. They stood there smiling at the same misunderstanding that had left them both miserable. A cool breeze carried a few maple leaves across the path, and one landed near Ethan's shoes. Without thinking, Liam bent down, picked it up, and turned it slowly between his fingers. Do you remember when we were kids, and you said every fall leaf looked different because each one had its own story? Ethan smiled. You actually remembered that? Liam looked at him with the same warmth he had shown ever since they were 8 years old. I remember almost everything about you. Those words settled gently into Ethan's heart, dissolving years of quiet doubt. He realized that while he had spent more than a decade memorizing Liam's favorite songs, lucky numbers, coffee order, and birthday traditions, Liam had been doing exactly the same thing. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt peaceful. Ethan took a slow breath, knowing there was only one truth left to say. I have been afraid for a long time, he confessed. Not because of what I felt, but because I thought telling you would mean losing you. Liam stepped a little closer, leaving only a comfortable distance between them. You could never lose me that easily. Ethan smiled through eyes beginning to shine with emotion. I spent 11 years pretending friendship was enough because I thought it was all I would ever have. Liam's expression softened even more. Then maybe it is time we both stop pretending. Ethan felt every wall he had built over the years finally begin to fall away. He looked directly into Liam's eyes, no longer searching for certainty because it was already there. After all the silence, all the misunderstandings, and all the years spent hiding behind ordinary conversations, he finally found the courage to answer the question neither of them had truly stopped asking. Yes, Ethan said quietly. I do like you. I have for a very long time. Liam's smile grew brighter than Ethan had ever seen before, but before either of them could say another word, a sudden clap of thunder rolled across the evening sky, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The rain arrived without warning, transforming the quiet garden into a world of shimmering reflections and gentle ripples. Students hurried across campus with backpacks held over their heads, laughing as they searched for shelter, but neither Ethan nor Liam moved. For a few precious seconds, the only thing that seemed to exist was the truth that had finally been spoken aloud. Liam let out a breath that sounded almost like a quiet laugh, the kind that escaped only after carrying a burden for far too long. "You have no idea how many times I imagined hearing you say those words," he admitted. Ethan smiled, feeling the tension that had followed him for years slowly disappear with the falling rain. "I thought I would never be brave enough." Liam shook his head gently. "You were always brave. You just cared too much about protecting us." They finally walked beneath the wooden pavilion overlooking the pond, where the steady rain drummed softly against the roof above them. The familiar garden suddenly felt different, not because the place had changed, but because neither of them had anything left to hide. Ethan leaned against the railing and watched tiny circles spread across the surface of the water. "Do you know what scared me the most?" he asked. Liam stood beside him. "Tell me." Ethan smiled faintly. "I was never afraid that you would laugh at me. I was afraid you would be kind." Liam looked puzzled. Ethan continued. "If you had told me that you only wanted to stay friends, I would have smiled and agreed, because losing you completely would have hurt more than pretending everything was fine." Liam looked down for a moment before answering. "I almost did exactly that to myself." Ethan turned toward him. Liam rested both hands on the railing and watched the rain fall beyond the pond. "There were so many opportunities to tell you. High school graduation, your 19th birthday, the day we moved into our college apartments. Every single time I convinced myself that silence was safer." He laughed quietly at himself. "Then I saw you looking at me in the locker room, and for one second I thought maybe I was not imagining everything anymore." Ethan covered his face with one hand, still embarrassed by the memory. "I cannot believe I ran away." Liam smiled warmly. "You look like your brain completely stopped working." Ethan laughed for the first time in days, and the sound echoed gently beneath the pavilion roof. It felt familiar, effortless, like finding a part of himself that had been missing. Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I want to show you something." He opened a folder filled with hundreds of photographs collected over the years. Birthday parties, baseball games, road trips, holiday dinners with both families, school dances, college move-in day. Nearly every important memory included both of them standing side by side. Liam paused on one particular picture taken during freshman orientation. Ethan was laughing while looking away from the camera, completely unaware that the photograph had captured Liam looking at him instead of the photographer. "That has always been my favorite picture," Liam said quietly. "Not because of how I look, because it reminds me that every important memory somehow included you." Ethan felt emotion tighten his throat again. He realized that neither of them had fallen in love overnight. Their feelings had been quietly growing through thousands of ordinary moments that never seemed extraordinary until now. The rain gradually became lighter, and a narrow strip of golden evening sunlight broke through the clouds, stretching across the pond like a promise of brighter days ahead. Liam smiled as he looked toward the clearing sky before turning back to Ethan. "There is one place we still need to go," he said softly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Where?" Liam's smile became playfully familiar again. "Back to where this whole misunderstanding began." The walk back across campus felt strangely familiar, as though every path they had traveled separately over the past few days had finally become one road again. The rain had washed the sidewalks clean, and the cool evening air carried the fresh scent of wet grass and maple trees. Students passed by in small groups, laughing about assignments and weekend plans, completely unaware that two lifelong friends had quietly changed each other's lives forever. Liam led the way toward the athletic center, slowing his pace until they reached the locker room entrance. It was empty now, with practice long finished, and only the soft hum of fluorescent lights echoing through the hallway. Ethan stopped just outside the doorway and smiled nervously. "I never thought I would want to come back here." Liam laughed gently. "Neither did I." They stepped inside together. The rows of blue lockers, polished benches, and familiar tile floors looked exactly as they had only a few days before, yet the room no longer felt intimidating. It simply felt like another place where an ordinary moment had unexpectedly become unforgettable. Liam leaned lightly against one of the lockers and looked around with an amused expression. "It is funny," he said. "I spent years planning what I would say if I ever admitted how I felt. Ethan folded his arms with a smile. And, after all that planning, you asked one question. Liam rubbed the back of his neck, slightly embarrassed. It was not exactly the speech I imagined. Ethan laughed, the sound filling the quiet room. It definitely caught me by surprise. Liam looked at him with the same warmth that had been there all evening. Would you like to know the truth? Ethan nodded. I asked because I thought if you said no, I could pretend I had only been joking. It was my escape plan. Ethan smiled knowingly. Mine was running away. They both laughed again, realizing how much fear they had shared without ever recognizing it in each other. The silence that followed no longer carried uncertainty. It carried comfort. Ethan slowly looked around the room before returning his attention to Liam. I spent so much time believing that loving someone quietly was the safest choice. Liam stepped closer, his voice calm and sincere. And I spent just as much time believing I had to protect our friendship by never saying anything. Ethan shook his head with a smile. We really made things difficult. We did, Liam agreed. But somehow we still ended up here. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood together, appreciating how 11 years of shared memories had brought them to this quiet ending and an even brighter beginning. Liam smiled with the same playful expression Ethan had first seen as a little boy on the elementary school playground. There is one question I have wanted to ask again, he said. Ethan raised an eyebrow, already knowing exactly where this was going. Liam looked directly into his eyes and smiled. Now that I know the answer, do you mind if I look at you too? Ethan laughed softly, the last trace of nervousness finally disappearing. I think I would like that. They left the locker room side by side, not rushing toward the future, but walking into it together with the easy confidence that had always defined their friendship. Outside, the clouds had completely cleared, revealing a sky filled with bright evening stars. As they crossed the quiet campus, Ethan realized something that made him smile all over again. The happiest chapters of life do not always begin with perfect timing or perfect words. Sometimes they begin with two people who spend years protecting each other, only to discover that the place they had been trying to reach was never far away at all. And for the first time since they were children, neither of them had anything left to hide.